Welcome to Unleash the Awesome with Dave Gambrill. All of us have unique skills, talents, and abilities that aren't being used to their full potential. Our mission is to share the people, tools, apps, and other resources that will help you unleash your awesome on the world.
Yo, what's up? It's Dave. Welcome to another episode of Unleash the Awesome. Today, let's talk about the best ways to take action after a course, conference, or webinar. One of the things I see from people online is a great learning mindset, a lifelong learning idea or concept. And I see people taking lots of courses, watching Facebook Lives that I do, going through courses that I do, going through coaching programs. Sometimes I go through coaching programs with other people, and some people tend to apply what they're doing and learning, and some people don't. What is the difference? I think a lot of it has to do with whether or not you have a strategy or a tactic or a plan for what it is you're going to do after you learn the information. And so one of the things I learned from one of my mentors, John C. Maxwell, many of you know him as the world's #1 leadership expert. One of the things he taught me years ago was this ACT or ACT framework for how to apply what you're learning to your unique situation. So obviously it's an acrostic, right? ACT. And the A stands for apply. Okay. So if you are going through a course and you're taking notes, or you're watching a webinar, or you're at a conference and you're taking notes, and you take down some good ideas, you take down some quotes or whatever, one of the things that John taught me how to do is in the margin next to a thing that you need to apply. Like maybe you're not doing this at all. Right? It's something that you need to apply to your business in the short term. And you can set your own parameters for how soon, in the next day, in the next week, in the next 30 days, whatever, but there should be some time frame to it. But he just encouraged me to put an A in the margin next to the things that I need to apply. And don't do everything. There's probably a lot of things you need to apply, but pick the one or two main things, the two most important things, the two or three things that will move the lever. What are some things that you need to apply? He would have me put an A in the margin and circle it. Okay. So as you're going through your notes, and maybe you're reviewing your notes at the end of a session or whatever, go back and take a peek at it and say, okay, what are the things I need to apply? The C in ACT stands for change. What are some things that you learned through this conference, this webinar, this training, whatever, this meeting, this coaching session, some things that you're doing, but maybe you need to change them up a little bit. You need to change how you do it. You need to change the frequency. You need to change how you deliver it, whatever. Okay, so go through and pick the one or two things that you need to change. You're probably doing some of the stuff that you're learning already, but these could be little things. Like for me, one of the big aha moments I had one time was, I had heard this thing about building an email list. And if you've been following me for more than 5 seconds, you've probably heard me say that. But I wasn't really focused on how to warm up the people that came onto my list. So I would send out an opt-in magnet or whatever. I would get people on my list, but I didn't have really any kind of sequence where I could say, people that come on my list will automatically get this 3 or 4 or 5 day sequence, storytelling, about who I am, what I believe in, what I'm trying to help you do, the skills that I have, why you should listen to me, all those things, right? So building out that kind of sequence. So I heard that one time at a conference and I was like, ooh, okay, I'm sending out emails on a pretty consistent basis, but I don't have this warm-up sequence or this onboarding sequence, so I need to change that. So I put a C next to it and I circled it, right, or highlight it, whatever, however you take notes. But that was something that I paid attention to, okay? So the first letter A, apply, right? Find one or two things you need to apply. The second letter C is change. What are some things you need to change? Pick one or two things. Don't pick a lot because you're going to see what's going to happen here at the end. One or two, right? Maybe 3 max. And then the T in ACT stands for teach. Teach. So there are probably some things that you learned that you're already doing, and you could probably teach it. And you could take some of the stuff you learned and synthesize it and add it to your own teaching, right? I'm not saying take someone's intellectual property outright and use it as your own, right? Don't mishear that or misquote that. But clearly there's things you're already doing and you hear just a subtle difference or something that you go, okay, wait, I'm already doing this, but I could take this one piece and add it to it, right? It's like a little bit of flavoring or seasoning for something that you're already doing. So you're probably already doing some of these things. And you're probably doing them well. Why don't you go ahead and teach them? So pick one or two things in your notes from that event, that conference, whatever, that you will go ahead and teach as soon as possible, because you'll remember it much better if you turn around and teach it, right? So if you are trying to learn things in such a way that you know you have to turn around and teach it, then you'll pay even more attention to it, right? So, but look at the things in your notes, put a T next to it for teach, and circle it. So then you actually, coming out of this conference, training, webinar, whatever, you actually have some action steps to move forward on, some things that you should be doing. So when it's all over, you look at it, and if you picked one or two things like I recommended for each one, then you'll have about 6 things that you can look at and say, okay, here's some things we need to do, immediately. I need to apply these things. I need to change these things a little bit, and I need to teach these things. And, maybe if you picked more than 2, then prioritize it. So you'll only have 6 of them, right? And so you can go apply, change, and teach. And the reason why I recommend that you pick one of each of those is because, or 1 or 2 of each of those is because as you're growing your business, as you're doing more stuff in the marketplace, as you're building your audience and trying to publish content, podcast episodes, whatever, that'll give you stuff to work with, right? Because you probably have some confidence around the things that you're going to teach because you're already doing some of it. And you probably have a little bit of confidence around some things that you need to change because you're probably already doing some of it, right? But the application, the things you actually need to apply, those are probably new, and those are things that might take a little more inertia to get started, some things that you might procrastinate on, if you will. So if you have a list of each of those things, right, and you have 6 of them, then there's a chance you'll probably turn around and teach those things relatively quickly while you're also going through the process of applying what you learn. Because sometimes those new application projects and whatever take a little bit of time. I'll give you an example. Somebody asked me yesterday on a coaching call in part of my inner circle group. They said, hey, I'm getting ready to start a podcast. What should I do? And I was like, well, it's a big question, but here's some things I would consider. And I said, find a podcast host. So are you going to use Anchor.fm or Simplecast, which is what I use right now? What are you going to use for that? Do you have a decent microphone? How are you going to think about your content? Do you already have content you're going to talk about? If not, here's some things to think about there. And then I mentioned using Pond 5 to get some podcast safe music, Pond 5. And I'll put all these in the show notes so you can have access to them. Pond 5 to get some podcast safe music so you can buy the rights or a license to some music. And then going on Fiverr and getting people to do podcast intros and outros and maybe your podcast artwork. Right. So I mentioned all these things. So if those are things that you had to do, if you're listening to this and you're like, wow, I need to do that, I want to start a podcast, the turnaround time on the stuff on Fiverr is going to be a couple days minimum, right? Usually it takes folks on there 2 or 3 days just to get you the first draft, and then to finish things after you've had some back and forth, it might take a week. All right. So some of those things are going to take some time, even though you got them started. So maybe on the application piece, you get things going, you get things started. Even when you start a podcast, like on Simplecast, they will send the podcast out to all the different platforms, whatever platform you're listening to it on right now. But when I first did that, I had to go through this process of going to each website, the Google Play and Apple Podcast and Spotify and Amazon Music. And I had to submit it's called the RSS feed, but I had to submit the link to this podcast to those things. And then they said, we'll get back to you in 2 days, 3 days, a week, 10 days, whatever. So that all took time. All right. So when I first learned how to do all this stuff, okay, I went and did that. I applied it, but then I went back to my list of things and I'm like, all right, here's some things that I can teach, or here's some things that I can change that I'm already doing. And I can work on those in the meantime while I'm waiting for this other stuff to happen. Because I know a lot of you are in a side hustle situation, or maybe you haven't launched your business full time, and you got to be super smart about what's going on. So if you can delegate stuff or get things started that are running in the background while you're doing other stuff, you're working your 9-to-5 gig or whatever, that will be very helpful, because then in the little bit of time you have each day to execute on your side hustle, you can do some of those other things. You could do a podcast episode where you teach some stuff. You could do a Instagram TV or Instagram Live where you teach, or a Facebook Live or whatever, right? So again, one of the best ways I know to take action after a course, conference, webinar, training, coaching session, whatever, is the ACT framework, okay? A stands for apply, C stands for change, and T stands for teach. What are you going to apply? What are you going to change? What do you teach? And that way you'll actually put stuff into action. Because one of the things I see people do all the time is they collect a lot of information and they don't do anything with it. Under the belief that, and you've probably heard this before, that knowledge is power. And that is not true at all. Knowledge is not power. It's the application. It's taking action on that knowledge, on that information, where the power is. And I want you to know how to take action on a pretty reliable basis. And so if you use this framework, the action framework, that will help you. Okay. So until next time, go out and use this ACT framework to help you unleash your awesome on the world. See ya.
Thanks for listening to Unleash the Awesome. Please be sure to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen to your podcasts. And please share us on your favorite social media platforms using #UnleashAwesome.